You're listening to the Homeownership podcast by Momentum Realty, real estate talk for buying, selling, and owning property.
Hey guys, Sean Patrick Maloney here, broker owner of Momentum Realty, located in Hanover, Massachusetts. Welcome to episode 25, Why Owning a Home is the Best Choice. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Maloney. Thanks for joining me this week. I know a lot of people always wonder whether you're better to rent or you're better to own. It's a common question that goes around, and sometimes it's situationally based. If you're just going to be in an area for a very short period of time, sometimes you might just want to rent, but more often than not, you want to own. Ownership comes with a lot of benefits, and there's a lot of differences between the two. I'm going to go over the differences between the two, and you can make the decision of whether you're best to rent or own. Whether you're renting or owning a property, you can always reach out to Momentum Realty. We work with all renters, buyers, and sellers alike, and we can help you with any of your needs for property. So let's talk about some of the benefits to owning versus renting. One of the first ones I like to talk about would be the ability to make changes to where you live. When you're a renter, quite often, other than them allowing you maybe to hang some things or to paint some walls, you probably can't do anything to the property. When you own a property, you get to choose what kind of kitchen you want, you get to choose what kind of paint, where you want the things to be, how you want to take care of the home, what condition you want to leave it in, if you want to repair things, and how you're going to treat the place overall. One of the other things is if you're a renter and you make changes, you're going to be moving on without those changes. So if you paint the wall, you painted somebody else's wall. If you decide to upgrade something in the kitchen, you've upgraded someone else's kitchen. You're going to lose that value when you move on. Whereas when you own it, anything you do, they sometimes call it sweat equity, but you're actually putting in time where you're putting in effort that creates wealth for yourself, and then when you go to sell it, it actually makes it easier to sell it. So overall, when it comes to making changes, ownership is on the higher side of things on that. When you're a renter, you're best off to rent something that you like, so that way you don't need to make all the changes, and that way you don't end up losing something when you actually move on. The next one down is making the rules. When you're a renter, there's usually rules about pets, noises, guests, parking, and a whole bunch of other rules like that. When you're the owner, you can decide to have any pet you want. You can have 8 dogs as long as the town allows it, and you can make as much noise as you want as long as the town allows it. You can also have guests over whenever you want, and you're allowed to park whether you want to park on your front lawn or you want to park in the driveway. You can park wherever you'd like. Whereas when you're renting, you may have one assigned parking space and all guests might need to park down the street, or you may not actually be able to have pets at all. Or sometimes they allow you to have pets, but then they charge you $150, $200 a month more per pet, which that can get pretty expensive when you think about everything. That's basically another month's rent that's gone each year into having your pet to be there. Because even at one pet, $150 a month, you're talking just around $1,800 a year that's going into just having the pet have housing, instead of it just going into your pocket and going into creating a better facility for your pet to enjoy. Maybe $1,800 a year, you could get a fence, you could get a lot of different things if you actually own the property. So ultimately, when you have pets, you're a noisy person, or you like having guests over, it's really the place where you want to own. If you're a quiet person, you don't mind, you don't have many pets, you're not home often, you don't really use the place much, renting can be easy because of the fact that you don't have to take care of much. And usually, when it comes down to it, even though renting is less powerful than ownership, there can be some benefits in the fact that you don't actually have to do much. You can usually just turn the key and lock the door and leave. And then if anything goes wrong, you reach out to the landlord. But the difference between the two is when every time you reach out to the landlord, chances are in the long run it's going to end up raising your rent, because as costs go up for him or her, costs are going to go up for you. Whereas when you're the owner, you do something, you change anything, it's going to actually add equity to your property. But again, making the rules is a big deal. And for a lot of people, it's actually a huge part of life. We don't realize it. We all think we are so open and no, it's not going to be a big deal. Then you move in and you get your first phone call or notice that says you're being too loud, or that your pet needs to go. Or God forbid, you had a pet for 9 years and you need to move to a new apartment and you can't find one that'll accept the dog or cat that you have, which means now you need to go down and give it away to a shelter or pass it off to a family member. And that's just a horrible thought. No one wants to be doing that. Next one down is taxes. So as a renter, you don't have mortgage interest to write off. Having a property, you have mortgage interest to write off. So that's a huge one when it comes to your taxes. The amount of tax break you get. And again, I mean, obviously you're paying taxes and it's all kind of a wash, because if you're paying taxes and then you're able to write off taxes is an advantage, but the advantage is in the gained equity. The advantage is in the long run of your payment is able to be written off because of the fact that this mortgage is bearing interest, and you're able to capitalize off of more of your own money staying in your own pocket. Because as you know, it doesn't matter whether you're paying $1,000 or $10,000 a month rent, it's all gone at the end of the month and it's all due again the next month. Whereas when you're paying your bill on your mortgage, that mortgage interest that we all hate, we can write a lot of it off at the end of the year in our taxes and save and get money back and get a higher return payment from the government at the end of the season. So that's also kind of a nice benefit to actually owning property. Next one down would be staying settled. This is a big one to a lot of people, especially people with children. Staying settled is a huge part of life. Some of us are okay with being transients. We can move from place to place. We don't really get grounded, but other people really get grounded. And one group of people that really get grounded is children. Children get comfortable with the schools and friends they have. It's very difficult to take a child during mid-year and move them from school to school. Not that it's not difficult when you move them in the middle of summertime, but it's very difficult no matter when you move them. The truth is, kids don't really like moving that much. And if you're a renter, you might move same town to same town. But the reality is their bedroom never became their bedroom, and the child they really value that. They really value that personal space. So don't a lot of adults. You kind of get used to the habits. We're all habit forming. We all do similar things. We all think we're so different all the time. But the reality is we go back to those same things we know. And there's something settling about going home to the same house, to looking at the work that you've done over the years, to thinking about the memories you've generated, to thinking about where you're going to go in the future with that property, and just being in your own place, being in your own spot, and not having to move. Moving is a lot of stress, and it's actually very expensive. For moving a house, a lot of times, not only do we run into the cost of actually moving, but a lot of times we actually have to change furniture because of the fact that the living room might not be the same size. Your sectional that you had at one home may not work at the next. The paint colors, again, we're back to paint because we don't own the property. So when we rent the next one, if the walls are blue and all our decorations were for a place that was red, it's going to be very difficult to make them work out. So now suddenly we're buying decor, we're changing it over. And again, you need to look at these costs when you're thinking of the costs of renting versus owning, thinking that renting is cheaper, but all the time, every year you're spending these huge amounts of money to move, to change furniture, to change decorations, and to just overall get it done. So a lot of time, lots and lots of time can be dedicated to moving. And also, your friends get sick of you moving. They always say you know a good friend because they're there on moving day. Reality is there ain't many good friends out there. They're going to quickly diminish as you continue to move year after year. So owning a home can help you build friendships, can help you have a place, because now you're going to have more people over. They're going to know where you live. They're going to do the drop-bys. You can have cookouts. Again, we're back to that guest thing. A lot of rentals, you can't have a barbecue on the back porch, whereas at a home, you can decide whether you want to have a barbecue at the back porch. You can put it up on the upper balcony if you decide that's safe for yourself. You get to make those decisions, whereas you do not get to make those decisions when you're a renter. Next one down, this is a really important one, is equity. We talked a little bit about it with the fact that rent payments just kind of go into thin air, and every month, whether it's $1,000 or $10,000, it's there and then it's gone. Whereas with a home, yes, when you pay your mortgage, you're paying quite a bit of interest up front, especially in a 30-year fixed in the first few years. But the reality is there's built-in money that is going to be being put aside. But the built-in money that's being put aside is nothing compared to the equity gained in the long-term hold of property. In the United States, properties have always slowly but surely creeped up. Yes, we've had some downfalls, we've had some ups and downs, back and forths, but the reality is properties constantly are worth more money than they were yesterday. And if you hold them for more than 10 years, usually you can do pretty well on your money and you can gain some equity, which means that when you go to sell, you're able to actually pull that equity out and use it on your next home. Equity, for those who don't know what equity is, it's the built-up ownership portion of a home. It's the money that you have that you don't owe the bank. So say you owed the bank $200,000, but the house is worth $50,000, then you have $50,000 in what they call equity. The other thing that's great about equity is the thing called a home equity line. Home equity line is a way of borrowing against the home that you have. I wouldn't suggest taking them just to buy a new boat or to buy a new car, but when you can take them is when the kids need to go to college, you have an emergency, or you want to put an addition on the home, or a lot of other things like that. Equity money is some of the cheapest money you'll ever borrow. The cheapest money you'll ever borrow usually is the mortgage. Mortgages are fairly cheap. I know we all think of them as expensive, but the reality is if you borrowed that same amount of money on a credit card, you'd be absolutely buried in debt. Whereas you're borrowing at 3 and 4, maybe 5% on a home, you're going to be borrowing at 20% on a credit card. Equity loans are going to fall into the 4, 5, 6, 7 category, maybe a little higher depending on what kind of credit you have and things like that. But equity is a very powerful thing. I actually am working with a client right now who's about to buy a home with the equity from his home on another home. So he's actually able to finance himself by leveraging the one house and buying the other house cash, which means that at the end of the day, when he puts a renter in this, now he has a renter paying back the equity on his last home that he just borrowed on, plus the money that he was making on his mortgage payment. So he doubles his money down, and he's overall using what they call the leverage advantage to gain leverage and to gain control of a larger portion of real estate, which again is going to build to his overall portfolio and wealth. So equity is something really important that you do not get whatsoever when it comes to a rental. The next one down is return on investment. On return on investment, this is something where we talked about at the beginning about the ability to make changes. It's that custom kitchen. It's that paint on the walls. It's all the different things you've done. The ability to get a return for that. So you've done the changes, and then when you actually do go to sell, you're going to end up getting more money back than you put into it, especially if you do it yourself. If you're willing to do the painting yourself, or you're willing to do quite a bit of the work yourself, you can build what they call sweat equity, back to the word equity, but where you actually have value in the fact that you did the work yourself, so now you get a larger return on investment. Return on investment simply means you put $1 in, you get $1.10 back, then you have a 10% return on investment. It's pretty easy to do. It's pretty easy to make money on. It's something that you'll never see when it comes to your investment on rentals. Your return on investment on rentals is zero. You do not make any money back for all the money you've given them. You're just giving them rent. You do get housing. Sometimes it is cheaper than the ownership side of things and the overall costs on the day-to-day, but the reality is in the long run, all the money's gone when you're done with it. So you got to think about that, and you got to also think about the fact that you're not building any credit. When you're borrowing money on a mortgage, there's no better way to build credit. The mortgage company is going to make an attachment on your person, and they're going to hit your credit. They're going to tell the credit bureau that you owe money, and as you make payments, they're going to give you better credit. By making your monthly payment on time, you're going to be continuing to build your credit, and the higher you build your credit, the lower the interest rates you can get, and the more money you can borrow, and the more money you can borrow, the more leverage you can create. The more leverage you can create, the more wealth you can create. Now, when I say leverage and wealth and creation and return on investment and building credit, I am not talking about going down to Macy's and buying yourself a new purse with a Macy's card. That's dumb. That's really dumb, and if you're doing that, I feel bad for you. I think you need to take a look in the mirror and you need to think about what you're doing, because if you're not buying things that give you return on investment, equity, or looking at income-producing assets, you're really foolish. When you want to buy something like a purse or anything like that, you want to do that cash. Buying purses, buying all these frivolous things that we buy all the time on credit cards is going to lead to being a renter forever, because you don't realize by having your money in your bank account, you're building interest and you're building up a down payment so that you can make a purchase. But when you're not building your credit and you're just damaging your credit by consistently using it on things on your credit card and then missing payments because you've over-leveraged yourself to get frivolous items such as new clothing and things like that, you're going to end up a long-term renter versus an owner. And you're going to end up making an owner rich someday, because every time you make a rent payment, he uses it to make a payment down on his home, which pays down his equity, which then turns into a return on investment because of his built equity over time. So you can see how renters actually make owners wealthy over time, which is why it's better to own a house versus renting a house, and why it's better when you can to own multiple homes over time. A lot of people say to themselves, I could never own multiple homes over time. Let me give you a scenario. You buy a home. You buy a cheap home that you can afford. You stay there for a while. After a while, you've built some equity. You pull a home equity line. Use some of that equity to put a down payment on a second property, maybe a little bit larger this time. You move to the second property and you rent out the first property. Use the rent money to pay down the home equity line, and you use more money to pay for the new one. Now you're using the leverage of another person to build yourself that ROI and that equity you're looking for, and ultimately building a larger and better credit report. So remember, when it comes time to make the decision, sometimes you need to rent for a little while, But when you do rent behind the amount you can afford. If you can afford $1,700, rent $1,400 and put $300 a month away. Or even better, rent at even lower costs. But do not rent luxury apartments. Do not rent those things unless you're an executive and you're going to be in an area for a year or two and you're looking for a nice place to live because you own a home somewhere else. Do not get into a place where you're paying so much on rent that you're house poor, yet you don't even own a home. One of the other huge benefits of owning a home is the ability to join a community. The longer you live at a home, the more you're going to know everybody that's around you. You're going to have the neighborhood block parties. You're going to have the enjoyment of meeting your different friends and family. Maybe they even live close now because you're part of the community. You're going to be part of the same school systems. And ultimately, you're going to kind of build a life for yourself. When you're a renter, a lot of times, you're moving in and out of buildings, place to place. You make some friends, then you head out. You make some other ones other places. You're never really a big part of any community. And unfortunately, it's very difficult on the people in your family. So make sure when you're thinking about it overall, whether you should rent or own, if you are going to be a renter, make sure you're in a community where you can actually rent again, even if that last landlord won't let you have the same place back, you can stay within that same community. Because ultimately, when you're an owner, you get to do that for as long as you decide, until you decide to sell that home. Last but not least, one of the things I just want to go over with you is it's really important to think about long-term wealth. In life, a lot of us have been led wrong. We've been told all different things. We've been told we're going to get wealthy by going to college. We've been told all these different things. But every single time we do any of these things, we've dived deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. The only time in life that I see that you're actually building wealth when it comes to acquiring debt is when you're buying income-bearing assets. When you're buying income-bearing assets such as homes and things like that, it's okay to go into debt. Be super careful when it comes to getting in debt in life. It's very difficult to get out of debt when you're not buying these types of things. Because even when you feel like you're in debt and you can't understand how am I going to make that next mortgage payment, if you've been there for a little while, you can actually sell out and pull your equity. You can't do that with things like a credit card item. You buy a purse for $100, it's worth less than $50 the moment you walk out of a store. You buy a home for $100,000, sure enough, a year or two later, it's probably worth $105, maybe $110. Quickly, you can build a lot of money in owning real estate. If you're looking to buy real estate or rent real estate, please feel free to reach out to us over here at Momentum Realty. We'd love to help you out. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can email me, DM me, whatever works best for your form of communication. Make sure to follow the podcast, and thanks for listening to us this week. We look forward to talking to you next week.